Joining me right now, I have attorney Sheryl Hunter and attorney Adam Hersh. They're with Hunter Business Law. We are here to talk about overtime and some new rules that are being proposed by the President of the United States. Adam, tell me about what those rules are. What does he want to see have happen?
So what they want to do is they want to focus on the Fair Labor Standards Act and making the amount of people that are eligible for overtime compensation significantly increase.
Okay, and how do they plan on doing that?
Well, right now, the number of people that qualify, there's two tests. So there's a salary test and then there's a duties test. Right now, the salaries test is if you have at least $455 a week, which is $23,660 a year as salary.
Okay.
You satisfy that test, meaning that's part of it. So you're exempt from being paid overtime if you are paid at least $23,660. Not a lot of money. Exactly.
Do you think most people understand that?
No, and part of this is what makes this test very complicated is there's a big misconception out there that simply because you are salaried, you're exempt from overtime, and that's not the case.
But
that's the duties test.
you hear that all the time, and especially in the world of education and in any of these other things where you have long hours.
And so that's part of the problem. And one of the biggest things that can cripple small businesses are the fines associated if you misclassify someone and treat an employee as exempt who is not really exempt.
Right, because the duties test is what matters. So just because they qualify from a salary standpoint, they also have to be an administrative, professional, managerial duties, but you can't just smack a label on them and say, well, you're an assistant manager now, and therefore you're exempt. They have to actually be doing functions that are consistent with being in that professional position.
Let me see if I can make this a little clearer. So the bottom line is that what a lot of companies have been doing, whether it's legal or not, is they've been saying to people, we're going to make you a manager now. And you may have to work 45, 55, 60 hours a week, but you don't get overtime because, see, we've already rolled that together in your salary.
Exactly right.
See, you've nailed it.
Exactly.
So you could take a person, let's say they're making a $50,000 salary, you say, oh, they're exempt from overtime. Not necessarily. If you name them as an assistant manager, no, not necessarily, because if that assistant manager doesn't have hiring and firing duty or abilities to do that, make those kinds of decisions, they're not actually exempt and they're entitled to overtime.
But Adam, in the real world, are you going to go to your boss and say, by the way, you owe me overtime even though you now call me a manager?
So here's how this situation typically plays out. When the relationship ends,
okay,
that's when these things come to light.
Okay.
It's if they're ever if they're ever terminated, whether or not it's wrongful or not. One of the first questions an attorney may ask is, well, what was your salary? And then, were you paid overtime?
What were your job duties?
And then you go through. So there are 7 exemption categories which are eligible, to be exempt, you must meet one of these 7 categories.
Okay.
What we have done is on our website, www.hunterbusinesslaw.com, under the media section, we have posted an ebook going through these 7 categories so that you're able to see exactly what they were. So, for example, what they are.
They still are.
So the assistant manager, as you exactly were talking about, in order to meet the managerial exemption, you must manage 2 or more employees and have hiring and firing authority.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, so that's very, very specific.
If you don't do that, you don't meet that criteria. And even if you may make $50,000 or $60,000 and you're an assistant manager but don't meet those criteria, since you pass the salary requirement but not the job duties requirement, you are entitled to overtime compensation.
So this executive order, now let's talk about this. So the president just decides what's a work week and what's not a work week, or does Congress have any input?
It's not really that simple. I mean, he came out in March of 2014 and said, I want the Department of Labor to look at what the current situation is with this overtime exemption, non-exemption situation.
Hint, hint, we have a lot of companies that are taking
Fair Labor Standards Act. Well, I mean, the reality is the salary threshold has not been updated since 2004. They recognize that the number of people who are qualifying for or who meet the standards for the salary tests are very different than who's meeting the standards for the management and the professional level. They're out of sync completely. So what they're talking about doing is changing the salary test significantly. the salary test would be changed to a percentile of the number of workers. So they want to have the threshold be consistent with the percentage being the 40th percentile of workers who are making a certain amount of money, so that they're approximating that the number of professionals, really white-collar workers that should be exempt, should be more like 40% of the working population.
So in Florida, about 4.2% of Florida's workforce would be affected by the rule change. In other words, they would be able to make more money because even though they've been defined as managers or something, they may not meet this test that you talked about.
Exactly.
And they
Let's take that $50,000 a year woman, right?
Yeah.
So now, if the salary threshold, they're talking about that maybe would be around $48,000 now.
Okay.
So she would still qualify from the salary test standpoint. So it's not going to capture everybody, but they think as many as 11 million workers will now qualify for overtime pay that previously didn't qualify. And there's also the goal of making it clearer to employers that you're not meeting all the tests properly,
Adam,
and you've got people who aren't making overtime when they should
in
be.
reality, what happens though is that people are afraid to call an attorney to help out because they're going to say, well, any money I would have been gained is going to be eaten up in attorney's fees. I'm just trying to be honest because I know that that's what the people think. They don't want to challenge it. Even sometimes when you have a contract that it maybe isn't written the way you'd like to have it written, they go, well, I don't want to challenge that because it's going to cost money. Yeah.
So those statutes typically have a fee prevailing statute. So if the employee were to prevail, they would get their attorney's fees paid. However, our goal in protecting businesses is to make sure that you as a business do not find yourself in this situation.
Right.
Okay.
And one of the things that we want to make sure that every business owner does as we start the new year is make sure to look at your employees and make sure that they are classified properly. Because if an employee is misclassified, it can become very expensive, and that very issue that you mentioned. So the key is, before it becomes a problem, our goal as general counsel for your business is to look at this and proactively address this issue.
And make sure you're right. Now,
And
I know one of the argument's going to be, though, you know what, if this rule goes through, I'm going to have to put more people on part-time because I can't afford to pay overtime.
Well, that's an interesting point, and you're right. There's going to be an evaluation by employers, and they're going to say, geez, let's take that $50,000. She'd be making $18,000 more if she was working 50 hours a week instead of 40.
Right, yeah.
Because you'd have to pay time and a half. That's overtime. If you fail to do that, you can be penalized double plus governmental fines.
But is there somebody that's out there watching this? Because a lot of people would say there's some wink, wink, nod, nod going on right now, and there are literally thousands of employees that are doing this.
there are. And as you can see, right recently in Tampa, there was a big assisted living facility that just got nailed for this. When it typically comes up, as with most employment problems come up, is after the employment relationship ends.
Yeah.
So it's really important that you proactively address these things, because while you might not intend to terminate an employee today, you don't know at the end of the year. And these things carry over. Part of what makes these fines so drastic are because if you terminate an employee at the end of the year, just for example, you would still have the after effects of everything that happened this calendar year as to why this can be such a problem.
So the bottom line, it's a warning to businesses. You better make sure you know what you're classified as, and if you're an employee, you better know what what rules affect you right now. And we'll get you back again whenever when the executive order goes through, so we can try to make it clear for our audience again. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it. We appreciate it.